welcome to a very special edition of the Libertarian Listener. In this edition, we're covering the 2020 US presidential election. It's going to be Biden versus Trump, and what we think the outcome of that is going to be. Aside from that, Boris Johnson has given us a Halloween trick, which is to put the UK into a second lockdown, so we're also going to be talking about that. It's worth mentioning that at the time of recording this, the US election results have not yet been declared. So we're going to give you our thoughts on both of those, and I hope you enjoy it. So what are people's initial thoughts on the second lockdown?
I mean, not specifically the second lockdown, but in general, Boris Johnson, it can be directly attributed to him that we have experienced the greatest loss of liberty since Oliver Cromwell formed the Protectorate. I genuinely think that he is responsible for an incredible deprivation of liberty. Look, I'm not saying that it was better in the past. I'm just saying that, like, in terms of like how many rights you've lost over a short period of time, I don't know what the SI unit for that is, but how I think we really have, if there was one, Boris Johnson would score the highest. There's so many liberties they've infringed, but the big one that I'm, peed off with, really, quite frankly, is the deprivation of religious liberty, which is what I believe. And in the US, that is enshrined under the First Amendment. But I'm here, unfortunately, in this country with no written constitution. We do not have that.
Well, they still kept their, even in the States, they was closing churches and synagogues, and they were also shut down there. But I agree. I mean, how this can be justified? The second lockdown, the first one, everyone says, yeah, well, you can kind of justify it because we didn't know. And I disagree with that. I think to make a drastic decision like they did, even at the first lockdown, I think to make that drastic decision, it has to be based on some kind of fact. You can't say, well, I watched a video clip from a hospital in Italy, and that's why we've shut the entire country down. Or, we saw the videos coming out of China. I mean, is this how we make our national decisions? The biggest decision the country's ever made because we watched the news from Italy. Right from the beginning, even before we locked down, we knew it was really just affecting old people. And the numbers were, it was all very much, the water was very muddy, but it wasn't astronomical. I cannot believe that we now know all of the facts. We know what the death rate is. We know how to protect the old. We know how to treat the illness, and we've locked down again. I mean, it's just, I really do think that the world has lost its mind. And, you see the YouGov polls that we've got 70%. It's like 72% of people apparently are wanting another lockdown. And, I mean,
I don't disbelieve that. I don't disbelieve that.
I cannot believe it. I really lost my faith in humanity in a big way through this.
It saddens me, and it has also made me lose my faith in humanity. In a big way, it really has. I don't disbelieve it. I don't think that is a disingenuous poll. I genuinely think that something has to happen, surely, to make people crave their liberty. Firstly, in terms of our cause, but just how can we survive as a human race if we do not wish to have individual determination over the course of our lives?
It's a very dark path we're going down here, man. This whole situation, I've got a very, very bad feeling about it. If the government can manipulate us into this situation in the way they have, and the complete psyche of the country has been manipulated by these egregious stats and figures and graphs. If they can make us do that, they could convince us to almost do anything. Communism's a great idea, guys.
And in such a short period of time, also. Can you imagine what we would have been saying this time last year? I tell you what, if you had said in 2014 when we had Ebola going around in Africa, people were there was a debate over or not whether to bring the nurse home that had Ebola. There was an actual debate over that, but if they'd said, shall we lock down the entire country? Can you imagine the response? But how we've been conditioned to believe collective benefit is worth the not just slight, but absolute sacrifice of individual liberty. It is really sickening.
And I actually just read, I just finished The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek.
Yes.
And I tell you what an incredible book to read through these times, actually. It's always about the greater good, and we try to keep you safe. And that's the big thing. And when you go, when you go to Tesco's and the woman's shouting at you to put your mask on, because you got to keep everyone safe. It's just this tool that's being used now to, you know, to project this kind of, well, it's for the collective good of all of us. We need to do these things, and you know, that's collectivism, and that's, you know, that starts down that road, that, you know, exactly the road to serfdom. A lot of people won't ever admit to themselves that what they're seeing. You know, I think they just think, oh, it's okay. Well, let's just wear a mask and it'll go back to normal. But you know, anyone who's read a book will know that these liberties don't get taken away and then just get given back, or you know, free of charge at the end of it. Boris Johnson surely he understands the absolute devastation he's about to do with the second lockdown when it's completely unnecessary.
I don't think he does. No, I don't think he does. It doesn't seem as though anyone in the government has any comprehension of good economic management, not even Rishi Sunak, who seems to be doling out money left, right and centre as though it was paper. But really, that's all it is. It's not backed by anything, so they can just do that.
There's consequences to that, though, Chris. Even if you're printing money, but the more and more you do that, you know, there's other adjustments that need to be made. They're just messing with the economy. There is a limit to what they can do. And I think from 2008, from that crash, I think the stimulus and the amount of money printed in those days, they were just keeping the economy alive. You know, I think that the economy's kind of all more or less been out of commission since then. And I think it's come to a point now where there's the debt everywhere. I mean, America, you know, everyone all the countries are maxed out, you know, 100% of GDP, 120, 130% of GDP. They're angling towards crashing everything, and then there'll be a debt reset. Something along those lines. They were almost already, you know, you can't have multiple countries around the world all failing. They can't crash the economy because the rich guys will lose. So we'll come out, everyone gets a little debt reset, or they're completely restructure the monetary system by making sure they keep their cash and they still stay in power.
Has it sort of struck you as quite odd that it's been said that we're going to have twice as many deaths in this second wave than we did in the first? What sort of modelling is being produced that is giving these sorts of results, when if you look at the average death statistics for this year in comparison to previous years, it's pretty much normal now. We had a pandemic, there was a pandemic between March and May, and most of that, I think, can be attributed to very low seasonal deaths in 2018 and 2019, actually storing up trouble for this year. So how many of those deaths are actual COVID deaths is dubious, to say the least. But even in the briefings with Patrick Vallance and everything like that, he said that there was a new thing coming in March 2021. He slipped in a line about, in March 2021, there's going to be a new thing that comes in. Now, what on earth could he mean by that?
I know an individual who is, I mean, these things are always changeable. I know an individual who is, don't worry, I don't judge him for it. It's his own choice, but he's in the police, and he said that they've been prepped for it actually being 7 weeks to be eased just before Christmas and then locked back down just at the, just after New Year's.
Well, that's my job gone then. So
don't worry, Chris. It's only you and about 4 other million people. So
yeah. I mean, this is why I want to start my own business.
If you're not already an inhabitant of Hooverville, then you will be one of Borisville. They've been prepped, the coppers, so far. And trust me, this is like a tiny little regional small town police department, you know, that deals with people nicking badgers or something. I don't know. So, and if they've been informed of that, then God knows what's actually going on.
But it seems like they can just pick now whatever set of numbers they have, they somehow figure out how to spin those, and they can produce another model, and like they've just done. I mean, they've locked us down now again. If these are the same numbers in March, can you imagine what would happen? There's no way anyone would have gone for that. But now all of a sudden, with these, you know, relatively normal winter seasonal kind of respiratory illness numbers, they've somehow managed to justify another national lockdown. So it's pretty much, they can really use whatever numbers they have. I mean, we're in the middle of winter now. They're definitely going to find the numbers from somewhere, you know. That's essentially, we're at their mercy now.
There was already the questionable issue of people who actually died of other things being put down as COVID deaths, and it had been recorded as a comorbidity due to instructions to certain coroners to ignore certain things and whatever. Now, here's the thing. Already more people have died of flu this year than COVID. Now, lots of the symptoms are the same, and there's lots of old people who die of the flu. Now, it is possible to be infected by COVID and the flu at the same time. If you test positive for COVID, but you die of the flu, if you die of the flu, the symptoms are exactly the same. So can we wait this year for how many flu deaths are going to be just put down as COVID because the person happens to have COVID? Maybe it shortened their life by 6 hours, but they probably died of the flu. I mean, they are the same symptoms. If you get it really bad and you're 85 and you've got pneumonia, it's quite a common thing for people that die of old age for their death to be put to pre-COVID, for it to be put down to pneumonia anyway, because lots of them, when they're laid down on their back all the time, they've got a load of fluid build up on the lungs anyway, especially when they've got a reduced immune system. So then that's why so many of them die of flu. But if they also test positive for COVID, you can bet that it's going to be put down as a comorbidity.
In that respect, that if you now look at the flu numbers for this year, there was like 400 people this year who died of flu. So, I mean, come on, that last year there's what, you know what I mean? Last year there's 30 or 40,000 people. So, and how many people in the beginning? I know there was reported in the beginning in March that when people were dying, they were put down as COVID without a test. If it looked like they had the symptoms, I just think how we degenerated in the 21st century with medical science and technology that we have, that this whole situation is just complete chaos.
The fast test, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but the fast test, whatever it is they use, it just looks at the antigens on the outside of the viral cell. Now, here's the thing. COVID being a type of coronavirus, it is one of the many coronaviruses, including the flu and the common cold, neither of which they've ever made a perfectly good vaccine for, certainly not the common cold. The current fast testing they have already makes a lot of false positives for COVID-19. Now, here's the thing. Because of the similarity on the antigens of the outside proteins of the virus, the probability of someone who has common influenza testing positive for COVID-19 in terms of the proportion of these false positives with the fast tests is going to be greatly increased if they also have the common flu, because the proteins on the outside of the virus bear such a similarity, and because it's a fast test, it does. I don't know what the mechanism is behind. I'm not a scientist, but it does not differentiate as finely as maybe if it was something like a hantavirus or a norovirus. So therefore, if you have flu, obviously there's already a lot of false positives with the current COVID tests they have, but especially with the fast tests, if you've got flu, there's a very high probability that you're going to test positive for COVID because they're similarly related viruses.
The one thing I would say is I agree with Sir John Cowperthwaite, who said the first thing that you should do is to abolish the Office for National Statistics if ever you got into office. So,
yeah,
that's pretty much what's needed right now. But I mean, are you surprised as well that we're just going round and round in circles? Because you'd have thought that over the past 8 months, that the government would have done the extra research into this virus, realised that it's actually not too much of a big deal, thought about ways to navigate around it that isn't a lockdown or isn't tiered systems, but they've just sat on their hands. They've lied to the public, essentially, via the media, who've just been so willing to parrot their line. And everybody takes it in, because nobody has any concept of freedom or liberty. And they are completely blind to the facts that are out there, but that they are too lazy and idle to look for.
Well, because we have this bit as a nation, because we have this kind of termite man beehive, a national sense of, get out the Union Jacks and have a street party kind of a sensibility. Because we are unable seemingly to think for ourselves, unfortunately, it is incredibly easy for them to impose these measures. It's been incredible how they've come out with something, and then all of a sudden, if the government proposes something, then you go on, you look at BBC and you look at Sky, and obviously the papers, but if we just concentrate on the television channels, they'll have 3 people on, Emma from Dudley, Wera from, whatever. And you'll have 3 people, all who are broadly supportive of the measures that the government are taking. And it just seems, it's just eerie. It is very, very eerie how the government comes out with something, the media decides to report on it, they interview the general public, and then all of a sudden the general public whom they interview are incredibly supportive for it. And then 14 days later it gets passed. There has been no lockdown measure that has been proposed by anyone in Parliament that has not yet been implemented.
Good Morning Britain, sort of daytime television show that no one really ought to be watching if they've got a job. But basically, Eamon Holmes, one of the hosts on there, let slip that they could not challenge the government's line, that what they were being told, they had to report it as fact, regardless of how wrong it is. So not only have
they were told that by Ofcom.
Yeah, but not only...
Ofcom told them to.
We've lost any sort of sense of democracy because we've essentially got a de facto parliament. It's not really a place for scrutinising ideas anymore. It's literally just an echo chamber. It's literally an echo chamber now. There are no competing ideas going against the government. But then overlaying that, you have the media that can't then scrutinise or challenge to any effective degree the measures that the de facto parliament is implementing, because the de facto parliament has, via Ofcom, as you've just said there, Jason, are censoring what can and can't be said.
The fact that Ofcom exists is one of the most poignant indicators of the deprivation of liberty that we presently suffer in this country.
And it's not just there on the news or anything like that. It's also online. I mean, if you go onto Google, I typed in a search for the research on this show, and all of the results on the first page were from The Guardian. And I'm not joking. Every single one of them for the first 10 results was The Guardian. And you just think, well,
that is horrendous.
It's got a left-wing bias. It keeps reminding me that I've read 100 articles this year and it wants me to pay money in order to keep it going. But I'm never going to do that.
It's this very slippery slope. And as you say, no parliamentary scrutiny. And you just think, I hear old Nigel Farage coming out with his new party that he's looking to head up, and I think I could see him being the next Trump for England. Could that be the case? I think there'll be a big large swathes of people in this country that if he had to stand for the next election, I think he would he'd make a dent.
I'd love to think that he would be the next Trump in England. I mean, not that I like Donald Trump in any way, shape or form. I sadly think that, unfortunately, it's not like there is a silent majority that wishes to, that is gasping for liberty, but unfortunately denied it by the tyrannical system, as there is in Belarus, for example, as we've seen recently in terms of the protests there, which conveniently they've stopped reporting on. But at least in a country like that, you've got a lot of people who want some sort of freedom and are being denied it by a tyrant. In this country, we've got 2 parties, both of which broadly agree on basically all of the issues, and a public that have been so conditioned by the media over literally the last 100 years that they are broadly supportive of every single policy that they put through. And they always create adversaries. They created the EU I don't like the EU greatly, but they created the EU courts as an adversary. Oh, they're being so difficult with us. And now they've created, the coronavirus obviously you don't want to get it. It's a bad disease, but that's a new adversary. It's an existential crisis.
This is it. You need that invisible enemy. That's everyone that's it, man.
It's the army chasing the unicorn. It really is. If the unicorn's shooting at you, we're all going to go after it. But it's just a case of when you get there, it's gone.
Yeah.
So maybe it's more like out of George Orwell's 1984, the boot stamping on a human face forever, constantly keeping it in submission.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know how far it would go, but I still think people are hanging on to the hope that it literally is just, is this going to be this last couple of weeks? And I think a lot of people won't admit to themselves what is actually happening. And this, that if they don't realize that they're letting it carry on when they need to be like we are, we're speaking up right now. We need to stop this now. But I think people will all, people rather carry on with their lives and just think, okay, fine, I'll just wear my mask for another 2 weeks and one more lockdown and it'll all be over. people don't want to admit the harsh reality of what's actually going on, I think. But I do think there'll be a line crossed eventually, and there will be in the majority.
I think it's going to be crossed a lot sooner than you think, because I know you're going on earlier about polling that suggests 70% of people support the second lockdown, for example.
I don't trust that poll. That's a UK poll.
Well, this is the thing. I could equally develop a poll that probably says 70% don't support a second lockdown. If you actually listen to, some vox pops and just ask people on the street about what they think of it, I guarantee you that their answer is going to be different to that which is being reported. I don't think there is any support hardly for a second lockdown.
So where do we all see, what do we all think the results are going to be on, tomorrow now? A couple of hours' time, the big US elections.
Yeah.
What are predictions, boys? What are the predictions?
My prediction is that we, in terms of Trump's campaign, I would say that he probably loses the popular vote. And then I'd say that he loses 2 states. And I imagine it's probably going to be Florida and Pennsylvania. I think there will be some civil unrest, and I think it will be hashed out in the Supreme Court past the time at which it is usual for a president to be inaugurated, and therefore there will have to be a certain Supreme Court process past then, because then it will be who remains president whilst that is being decided, obviously due to the fact that there is a constitutional amendment specifying the term limits.
I think I've been fairly consistent. I think about 3 weeks ago I called it. I think it will be Trump. I think it's going to be very close. I actually think it's going to be very similar to how it was last time. I don't see any of the Rust Belt states moving back to the Democrats, and certainly not for Joe Biden, who is not going to give them their jobs back or anything like that. Because you've got to remember, Trump won in 2016 based on the disaffection of like a silent majority, so to speak, even though he didn't win the popular vote. He still managed to mobilize a hell of a lot of people into voting for him based on the way that corporate Democrats were talking about working people, very derogatory means and ways of going about it. I think there will be a clear winner. I think Trump will win, but not necessarily for the same sorts of reasons, because you got to remember now he's been there for 4 years. He's now running on a legacy. He's not playing from the outside. And I think the one thing that he's really struggled with during this campaign is he hasn't made the shift from playing an attacking game, which is what he played last time, to playing a defending game. He's still playing the attacking game because he knows that he's got a thin margin that could be, slipping at this election. And he's sort of rehashing the fight that he fought back then, but he's got the baggage of 4 years of being president. And if you look at his record...
And COVID.
Well, yeah, and COVID overlaying that. I don't genuinely think that COVID is going to have too much of an effect on the outcome. I really don't.
I genuinely think that if COVID was not an issue, I would almost at this stage be, obviously you don't know what else would happen, but I would almost be willing to say that if COVID had not existed, there would maybe be a slim Republican majority. But unfortunately, I think that as much as we like to think that America is a utopia of liberty and that we are not, obviously we are not, and neither are they, but unfortunately we're still exposed to the same kind of media, which tends to always suggest that the solution to an existential crisis is massive overreaching powers being taken by government. Unfortunately, given the fact that COVID has come about, I tend to think that any president who does not, and this is not me endorsing measures as such, obviously, because I think they are abominable, but I think that any president that does not put into place massive governmental overreach in order to face this existential crisis, given the current media climate, will inevitably lose on that matter.
Both candidates now have kind of stated that, Trump is kind of we need to learn to live with the virus, and Biden now is saying it's going to be a long, dark winter. So yeah, I mean they've really both staked their flags in the sand, which I think is a bad move for Biden. I think for the most part, I don't know, man. And going back to your point, Chris, that Trump won he didn't win the majority vote last time, but he won the electoral college. Now, if you think that all of the people that voted for, there's a few different ways to look at this and a few metrics to look at, but if you think all the people that voted for him last time are going to vote for him again, but how many more people would have moved from voting Democrat last time to voting for Trump? So, I think you can only add to the votes he had last time. He's not going to lose any votes. Look, there will be a big difference, I think, in how many people come out to vote, because, I think a lot of people realize what a big one this is. But I don't know, man. It's such a tough one to call, because my gut feeling is telling me it's going to be a landslide for Trump. I think these polls are just an absolute disaster. I think it's just like the media. It's just trying to generate more kind of hype for Biden. But you look at the enthusiasm. You see that 40, 50, 60, 70,000 people waiting in the freezing cold to see a Trump rally. And Joe Biden's got like 40 or 50 people. That's got to mean something. You've never seen you've got to see a presidential election like this ever.
Well, no, we have. We saw it the last time round, and funnily enough, last time round they were talking about, Trump's going to get a landslide. Trump's going to get a landslide. I don't think it will be. I genuinely don't think it will be. I think there's a lot of over-optimism. Going back to that point about he's now an incumbent president with a 4-year legacy. What exactly is Trump's legacy right now? He's got a half-built border wall. He's got the tax cuts that are going to be obliterated by his fiscal stimulus that he's signed off. His one claim to fame really has been that he's bombed ISIS off the face of the earth.
Middle East peace agreements are quite a big deal, in my opinion. I think he's the only president who hasn't gone to war, which everyone thought in the beginning. They thought for sure he's going to have his finger on the nuke ready to push the button. And, I think a lot of the predictions made about him actually 4 years ago, none of them have actually proved to be true. And I think in terms of his libertarian spirit, he at the start of the coronavirus, he took full control and made and led it on a federal level, where he didn't. He said, look, this is we're a federalist country, and everyone must deal with it themselves. I help out where I can. I'm here to help if you need help, but everyone deal with it themselves. He's had none of the authoritarian kind of policy or kind of personality that I think everyone thought he would have.
One thing I will say in favour of Trump, not in terms of personal favour, but certainly in terms of his chances, are people in the UK underestimate what a massive, huge voter bloc evangelical Christians are. Now,
yes,
in terms
they're all voting for him.
As you were saying there, Jason, in terms of the Middle East peace policy. Now, in terms of evangelical Christians, if you look at certainly the way that I look at the scripture, and certainly the way that many, it's very, very uncommon in Britain. Then again, being a Christian is very, very uncommon in Britain. But in terms of the US Christians, certainly the way that they look at it, is that there is a prophecy in the New Testament. Evangelical Christians genuinely do believe that the Son of Israel will return to Israel. And that the Son of God, that being Jesus, to judge the living and the dead, will return to Israel, that physical location, and that therefore, if they have not done something in order to preserve that from the hands of the heathens, which they see as the non-Jewish population, then or non-Christian population, either or, then that they've done something wrong. So people underestimate in America. The evangelical Christian voting bloc is still a big, big thing. I know he's seen left, right, and so he's had girlfriends and mistresses and here, there, and the other. But it's just the Israel thing that there's a lot of evangelical voters that will go for him just due to that.
The one thing I will say in addition to that is, I think a lot of the blame for the inner city riots that are currently happening is going to be landing on the governors, particularly in democratic states, which is where most of them seem to be happening, as opposed to on the president, who's done his best, really, at a federal level to try and bring a peaceful sort of urban environment for people.
And this is it. I think he's played his hand right. When all these riots were going on, he didn't send in the FBI with tanks and things to sort that out. He very much did leave it to the governors. And I think he gave them rope to hang themselves with, to be honest, because it was all the democratic cities that were experiencing these the violence and rioting and looting and things. So, I think it's very plain for, as long as you don't watch CNN or MSNBC or one of the big media channels, because then you might not actually realize what's going on. And this is another problem I find with this election, actually, that could be against Trump winning, is that for most people in a country or anywhere in the world, they don't care about politics. They just want to go about their daily lives, and they don't want to. And I think Trump has been quite exhausting over the last 4 years. And I think the frenzy that he's whipped up with the media has probably just been annoying for most general Americans who want to just watch the football game and have a barbecue with their mates on the weekend. Some people might be thinking, look, if we just vote for Biden, then Trump will be gone, and we'll just go back to boring old politics where nothing exciting happens, And so, that's a big thing. I think for the vast majority of people don't really care about politics or about, any of this. They've got busy, life's complicated,
And I turn on Sky Sports News, I want to see...
And they're taking the knee before the game.
Or on the cricket or on the rugby. I do not wish to know who has taken the knee, because I hate to say it, I do not give a flying fuck. I mean, it is just genuinely something about which I do not care. I completely respect their rights to, but I don't care. There are other things for which I may garner more attention. People are genuinely just annoyed with the politicization of everyday events.
It's either going to work against or for them or against them. People might, I think that, a vote for Trump, I don't know, man. Almost to the point where I think America is kind of lost I don't really see a happy outcome over the course of the next 5 years, man. I think whoever wins, there's going to be violence, and and to what extent really is the question. It's a worrying time, what do you think? Do you think there's a chance that it might split up?
Because so much power has been handed over to the state level, which I do support. I think because there is such a large amount of power that has been devolved to the state level, not that's a British term, devolved, but you know what I mean. That there doesn't need to be a civil war. The states will go their own ways. There's so much leeway in the judicial system of the United States nowadays that you can have, maybe Massachusetts and Delaware saying that you cannot have you cannot carry a firearm, and that you can abort up to birth. But then at the same time, you can have Texas and Alabama saying that you can open carry a machine gun where you want to, and that any abortion is illegal. So I think almost, because that's one of the beautiful things about the federal system, is because these things are so devolved. You can have the left-wing type people up north, and then the constitutionalist type people down south, or in rural areas or city areas, however it wishes to be divided. There doesn't need to be a civil war. They will just go their own separate ways, and the only thing that the federal government will eventually be responsible for is the judiciary, law enforcement, and foreign policy.
It's a very different story depending on which area you look at. I mean, you can look at California, for example. It's actually got one of the highest levels of extrajudicial killings for ethnic minorities. Whereas in an area that is sort of in the Rust Belt, you're not going to have that. So that's a factor that's sort of playing into these elections and things like that. But the voters will decide that in the end, and it will come down to the states. I don't think that many of these sort of issues on the ground that people are facing are going to be cycled up to President Trump and things like that, because it's really not within his jurisdiction to sort this sort of thing out. As Ed says, he's responsible mostly for the defense of the country and foreign policy. That is essentially the primary purpose of the United States. But even on that front, to say that it's America first, to me, and this is what he's been running on for the past 4 years, it's America first, America first. America first is looking a lot like America only. I don't think that Trump has been there as a leader of the free world. He has been there as a president of the United States. And I think that really, in order to be guaranteed a victory, he needed to look more like the leader of the free world and actually play that sort of global role in bringing about more libertarian and sort of freedom-loving ideas. But the fact is, I mean, he's not really a libertarian-minded person. He is an authoritarian. He sort of got away with it, but it's very close. I'm not certain. So that's all for this week on the Libertarian Listener. I hope you've enjoyed this special edition, and we'll be back with normal service next week when I'm interviewing Sean Finch, who's running for the London Assembly next year, provided they don't cancel the elections, of course. But until then, you can check us out on social media, the links to which are in the description below, and thanks for listening.